I'm Sam Roberts of the New York Times, and welcome to the New York Times Close-Up. This week, Times Metro political editor Dean Chang, state political reporter Ben Areskes. They'll join us to discuss the upcoming New York City mayoral primary. It takes place Tuesday, June 24th. But first, I'm joined by Luis Ferre-Sadurni, immigration reporter for the New York Times. On Tuesday, mayoral candidate Brad Lander was detained by ICE while escorting migrants at a Manhattan federal building, moving immigration policy even more into the spotlight as the mayoral primary approaches. Luis, we've heard a lot about the Trump administration deporting people, removing people, putting them somewhere else. Are these people who legally belong here or not?
So folks who are showing up at the immigration courts where the Brad Lander arrest happened and where ICE has been picking up a lot of people recently are usually in what they call deportation proceedings. They entered unlawfully into the country, but a judge is weighing whether they can remain here lawfully, and so they have mandated court dates that they have to show up to. A lot of them are also claiming asylum as a way to defend themselves against deportation proceedings. And so the immigration courts in lower Manhattan are where migrants show up as they're winding through that very complex process.
So would it be fair to say they're not necessarily here legally, but by deporting them or removing them, they're being denied due process?
Right, they're engaging with a legal process, right, as a judge is determining whether they can remain in the country. And then what ICE has been doing over the past month now at a national level is sort of a legal maneuver in which ICE prosecutors will dismiss their immigration cases in the courtroom, which then opens them up for ICE agents to detain them once they leave the courtroom and are out in the hallway, and put them in another sort of deportation proceeding, which is more fast-tracked and without hearings. And then critics will say they're being denied due process by being placed in those proceedings.
You wrote the other day that the Trump administration is sort of waffling on who to exclude, who to favor in terms of the city's economy. How has the hospitality industry, people cleaning office buildings, all those other things been affected by this?
Yeah, the president has sent mixed messages about the immigration crackdown. You're right. On one hand, he's saying that farms, hotels, restaurants should be exempted from workplace rates. That upset a large part of his base, advisors like Stephen Miller inside the White House. And then he came out with a statement saying that the crackdown should be focused on sanctuary cities like New York, Chicago, where the crackdown has been going on already. So folks here, despite the muddled messaging from the president, have been very scared already to show up to work at hotels, at construction sites, at restaurants. So yeah, it's sort of created confusion amid the ongoing fear that
what makes New York a sanctuary city? Why is it defined that way?
Yeah, sanctuary city is not a legal definition, right? It's basically a group of local laws and executive orders that together effectively limit how much city agencies can coordinate, cooperate, and communicate with the federal government when it comes to the enforcement of immigration laws, which are federal and are mostly civil.
Do we have any idea how many people have been deported or removed from New York because they are illegal, undocumented, whatever?
The short answer is no. ICE has not been transparent about the number of people it has arrested and the number of people it has deported in New York City. I think we can safely say it's likely been thousands of people that they've arrested over the past 5 or 6 months. The exact number we don't know, but we've seen an escalation in ICE raids at the homes of people they're targeting. We've seen in recent weeks immigration courts become a battleground in the crackdown, and it's really a very easy place for ICE agents to show up to arrest people, and that's what they've been doing. In fact, the main immigration court in the city, in Manhattan at 26 Federal Plaza, is also ICE's headquarters in the city.
So makes it very convenient.
It's an elevator right away to detain and process someone.
Luis, do we have any sense to what extent the police department is cooperating with ICE or not?
Yeah, the police commissioner, Tish, has been very adamant that the police department is not collaborating with ICE when it comes to civil immigration enforcement, which is sort of what we're talking about right now. But the police department does collaborate with the federal government when it comes to criminal investigations, for example, with other federal agencies on, I don't know, gang takedowns or drug trafficking, which sometimes touches on individuals who may be undocumented, right? But it's not that they're, according to the police department and according to the sanctuary laws, that they're coordinating with the Trump administration to pick up people just based on their legal status.
The Trump administration says it's trying to get rid of potential terrorists, criminals. Do we have any sense as to what proportion of the people who've been removed are in that category? Obviously not potential terrorists, but people who have criminal records other than the fact they're going in proceedings to try and legalize their status here.
Yeah, I mean, the Trump administration has focused on publicizing what they call the worst of the worst, right? They're going after people with who have committed serious crimes, who have criminal backgrounds. But I think it's become clear over the past several months at a national level that it's expanded beyond that. And I think they've made that very clear too, right? That anyone who is here without legal status, anyone who crossed into the country unlawfully is fair game. And what we've seen over the past few months in New York is that that's what's been happening. It's, yes, that people with criminal records have been detained by ICE and deported, but they're also picking up old and young immigrants without criminal records, longtime residents of New York, families, children. It's been, it's run the gamut.
Parents and children being separated?
Depends. There's been different cases. In some cases, it seems like the administration will give families, or at least this is what they say, they'll give families the opportunity to be deported with their children. But I've also covered cases where, young men, 19 years old, 20 years old, have been deported while their family hasn't. So in effect, they have been, separated from their household.
This may sound like a silly question, but how do we deport someone? Just stick them on a plane and send them somewhere?
It's incredibly complex, and that is one of the issues that the Trump administration is running into. Deporting someone to another country takes a lot of logistical maneuvering. It takes a lot of diplomatic relations with the country you're trying to send people to. And sometimes the U.S. does not have diplomatic relations with the countries they're trying to deport people to, as was the case with Venezuela for a long time, although Venezuela just recently started accepting a few deportation flights. So deportation is not as easy as just getting someone on a plane and getting them out of here. It can take weeks and sometimes months. And that's been a sort of hurdle for the Trump administration as they've been trying to ramp up numbers.
Luis, do we still have a migrant crisis in New York City?
Yes and no. I would say the acuteness of the crisis has subsided. Fewer and fewer migrants are coming into the city every week. I think it's hovered around a few hundred, and many are leaving the shelter system. Still 38,000 migrants remain in the city shelters. But the level of the crisis has definitely subsided, in part because border crossings are down since Trump took office and right before he took office. And that's led the city to be able to close a lot of shelters and sort of consolidate the emergency shelter system they had set up.
The court system has ruled against the Trump administration in many cases. Some people, Governor of Florida, defying that, or the Attorney General in Florida. Is there any remedy if a public official defies the court?
I mean, that's sort of what remains to be seen right now, how much enforcement power judges have to make sure that their orders are upheld. And I think that's sort of the issues that are playing out now nationally at the federal level between Trump and the Supreme Court and other justices on very high-profile cases around deportations to El Salvador. So, people will say that it's a situation that will escalate to a constitutional crisis. It still remains to be seen.
Do we have any sense as to what power a mayor has to fend off this effort by the Trump administration. Andrew Cuomo, Mamdani have both said they're the tough ones who can stand up to Trump. Can a mayor really do anything?
That's a good question. They have some power, but not a lot, really. The city has sanctuary laws, which, as I mentioned, limit cooperation between the city and the feds. And a mayor can come in and say, we're going to uphold these sanctuary laws. We're going to maybe strengthen them. We're not going to try to change them like Mayor Eric Adams has been trying to do. But it sort of stops there at the end of the day, because ICE can still operate in New York City. ICE has been operating in New York City, arresting people in different neighborhoods, in the courthouses. So there's not a lot that a mayor can legally do. But nonetheless, the candidates have all been posturing themselves as the best equipped to stand up to Donald Trump.
Posturing, a good word.
Yeah. And using it as a communication tool, right, to become sort of a vehicle for the values that a very liberal city wants to see.
A quick last question. Who's going to the anti-ICE protests? And is that a political movement at all?
Who's going in terms of candidates or
No,
people in general?
People, demonstrators.
Yeah, I mean, hundreds of people showed up last week. I think you had a mix. You had people who showed up protesting the immigration crackdown happening in the country, but it was also mixed with other left-wing causes, such as quote-unquote Palestinian liberation and Occupy Wall Street. So you saw a mix of things, but certainly when the protests were beginning, the thrust of them was around immigration.
Luis Ferre-Sadurni of the New York Times, thank you for joining us. Coming up next, the Democratic mayoral primary. It continues to heat up. The leading candidates intensify their campaigns. Joining me now, New York Times Metro political editor Dean Chang, state political reporter Ben Areskes. The mayoral race in the home stretch, at least for the Democratic nomination. High-profile endorsements, attack ads, early voting, and the mysteries of ranked choice. Welcome to both of you, and thanks for joining us. Dean, is this now anyone but Cuomo? Is it his to lose?
I wouldn't quite say that. Zoran Mamdani is a very credible threat to Cuomo. He's running maybe 10 points or so. The latest Marist poll has him reasonably close. And you really can't predict how ranked choice is going to play. There have been cross endorsements where candidates have agreed to have their supporters rank the other candidate, first and second in either direction. If enough of those people actually do that, it could elevate one of them past Cuomo. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but that's the danger to Cuomo.
Ben, you've been covering the governor closely. Is she giving any hint as to who she would be able to work with better?
She's been very clear that she's not going to weigh in on the race. She's focused on the Buffalo mayoral primary, which is where she's from. But obviously, there's a lot of history with one of the frontrunners and not a lot with the other. Mm-hmm. She was former Governor Andrew Cuomo's lieutenant governor. They had a fraught relationship. She replaced him when he became governor. And a lot of people wonder how that relationship would work, the importance of the mayor or the governor to the mayor. And we know how former Governor Cuomo sort of terrorized Bill de Blasio when he was mayor. She has said, I'll work with anyone to make the city good and make the state good, but she's kind of kept her cards close to the chest.
And I would imagine she would. It occurred to me the other day that Andrew Cuomo never got to be a four-term governor, which he wanted to best his father at, but he may well get to be mayor, which his father didn't get to do. Dean,
but in reverse order, right? Because Mario tried to be mayor,
right.
And lost to Koch in the primary, and then became governor. And Andrew's trying to do the opposite.
We can argue which is the bigger job.
Yeah.
You pointed out, Dean, I think in the newsletter this week that comes out on Tuesdays from the Times, that unlike 4 years ago, the people who are against the front runner are sort of coalescing. Is that going to make a difference?
Well, you know, what happened to Brad Lander yesterday outside or inside 26 Federal Plaza, that could drive voters toward the coalition between Mamdani and Lander. If people who weren't paying attention suddenly say, who's this Brad Lander guy, and decide to vote for him and rank Mamdani, again, above Cuomo, then in the final round, those votes will go to one of those two candidates and not to Cuomo.
Do you have to get arrested to get elected these days?
It certainly helps. I think the other New Yorker not on the ballot but looming over all of this is President Trump. And there's a huge amount of antipathy towards him among voters in the state and in the city. And with all of these candidates running for mayor, they're trying to present themselves as the bulwark against this person in Washington. With the comptroller's actions yesterday, we saw one way to show how you're going to be tough against.
You get arrested
exactly.
or detained.
Some people see that as, showmanship. Others view it as, putting your body, your privilege on the line. I think with the governor in mind, she was one of the people who helped get him out of detainment. And a lot of her hopes next year when she runs for re-election will be about the tough stand she's taken against Trump.
A lot of people say they don't want Cuomo. Why?
Well,
A lot of people say they're going to hold their nose and vote for him.
if you ask Bill de Blasio, he'll tell you why. He had a horrible experience.
Bet he will.
Yeah. I don't think there's a question that he has the experience, the know-how, right, to be mayor. He was governor for 11 years. But he also resigned under a sexual harassment scandal. And so I think the question to voters is, has he changed? Has he done enough to deserve another chance as mayor? And some people feel that he hasn't really acknowledged what he was accused of doing in any kind of way that's acceptable to them.
Ben, arguably, was he a good governor?
I think there's a lot that he did that people liked. A lot of major infrastructure projects, the rebuilding of Moynihan Station, LaGuardia Airport, and a lot of those big ticket items are at the forefront of people's minds. In addition to his early response to the pandemic, the sort of contrast he presented with Trump of being stable and reassuring to people. When you talk to voters, you hear a lot about that around the city.
A number of the candidates, Mamdani and Cuomo, have said they're the ones who can stand up to Donald Trump. But in fact, can a mayor really do anything if he decides to federalize the National Guard or, take action against New York as a so-called sanctuary city? What can a mayor do other than complain?
They can grandstand and they can file lawsuits, but ultimately, as you're seeing in Los Angeles, there's not much a mayor can do if the White House is intent on doing something.
The UFT is a good indication of the ambivalence in this race. The UFT, the teachers union, not endorsing a candidate. Why not?
Well, Mr. Mulgrew, the head of that union, sort of said that their members were split. And I think it does reflect the sort of divide in the city right now. People who are comforted by the experience of Andrew Cuomo and others who, at the forefront of their minds, are his mishandling of certain parts of the pandemic response, the sexual harassment allegations he denies. And I think that shows how the city is feeling right now.
Mamdani is coming across, certainly to his critics, as a radical. Is it possible New Yorkers want a radical now, that they're just fed up with the way things are after the Adams administration? And a radical is not a pejorative term necessarily.
To some people it is. I mean, we spoke to voters who turned out for early voting, and some of them said exactly that. It's time they need a radical change in New York City. They're certainly not happy with the current mayor, Eric Adams, and that perhaps someone like Mamdani is the answer.
I would just add, inequality in the city has worsened, the cost of housing, childcare, all these issues that people feel very viscerally. He is sort of playing back to them these problems and saying in very pithy ways that he has solutions. Whether he can really actualize that will be a question, but that's, I think, really why his success is maybe not as surprising to some, because he's really been able to articulate people's anger right now around the state of the city.
Although a lot of the things he promises as mayor are not within the purview of a mayor to accomplish.
Exactly, yeah.
Which, people ought to realize too. What about endorsements? Bernie Sanders, AOC, does that make a difference? Mike Bloomberg?
Well, Mike
Ezra Klein of the Times?
Mike Bloomberg makes a difference primarily because he then donated $5 million to a super PAC that's tied to Cuomo's interests, and that money is being spent on attack ads against Mamdani. So I don't know how much his endorsement will sway a voter. Oh, Mike likes Cuomo, I'm going to vote for Cuomo. But the money makes a difference. And as far as AOC and Bernie, if he had not gotten one of those endorsements, if Brad Lander had gotten one of those, it would have been a big deal to that candidate. But I think it was sort of expected that Mamdani would have gotten both of those endorsements. Had he not, that would have been a disappointment to him.
This is the first year the New York Times not endorsing a candidate in local race like the mayoralty. But we did have that opinion panel of people and what they thought, and Lander came out ahead of that. Is that, in effect, a Times endorsement?
They made very clear that it wasn't, that they wanted to seek out.
I know, that's why it sounded like.
I think we can take them at their word. We're not involved in the
Of
endorsement
course.
process.
Right.
But I think the agita around the endorsement process is a reflection of the institutions that people look to in the city and maybe how few of them there are that kind of can be a coalescing force. It's important to remember in the last election in 2021, the paper endorsed Catherine Garcia, the sanitation commissioner. It catapulted her in the polls. I think a lot of the candidates were looking for some sort of thing
Imprimatur.
imprimatur and something to supercharge their candidacies. That is on them to do, and there were not any other major institutions in the city that seemed to have that effect on the campaigns.
Dean, is there, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think the lack of a precise endorsement allowed a lot of candidates to choose their own adventure. Say, the Times said this about me, and pull it out almost like a movie review, pulling out the 5 words they liked, because the Times was not declarative about who they liked.
Is Andrew Cuomo the defining issue in this campaign, or are the candidates talking about something else and defining themselves differently?
I think everyone who's running against Cuomo want to make Cuomo the defining issue, but they're stuck on what that issue is. At first, they attacked made the sexual harassment allegations a central issue, but that doesn't seem to be playing with voters. I think most voters, or many voters, just aren't factoring that in terms for this election. So now they're focusing on all his ties to moneyed interests, real estate and such.
Is that a negative necessarily for people when almost all the candidates have now done something that is remarkable in New York City politics? They seem to be pro-development.
It's an incredible sort of thing to see. The defining issue of a lot of local races right now are about to build affordable housing here or there. And I think, again, it just shows how profound the housing crisis is in the city, that candidates are really willing to go up against some of the entrenched interests opposing housing in certain areas because they see how much this matters to regular voters.
It sort of undercuts the money coming from the real estate industry, I would imagine. Dean, is Mamdani a radical? I'm not sure how we define that, but
If you watch the Cuomo ads, you'd say he's a radical. I think if you looked at where he stood 5 years ago or so, you might say he's a radical, certainly different from the mainstream of the Democratic Party. As he's evolved in Albany as a lawmaker and as a mayoral candidate, I would be hard-pressed to define his stances as radical.
go
I
ahead.
just would add, my colleague and I, Grace Ashford, took a close look at his tenure in Albany and found someone who wasn't terribly productive passing legislation, but someone who did find a way to work within the system that is up there, which is very entrenched and very bizarre in certain respects, and was learning the process of it and how to be impactful. So I think when you consider whether he's a radical or not, he definitely is working within the systems that are available to him, whether it's running for mayor or working in the state assembly.
Ben, I think it was the article that you and Grace wrote that talked about the fact he didn't have much of a legislative record, but he did have impact in kind of pushing the legislature somewhat to the left. Why would people listen to him?
I think it's the power of the coalition and frankly, members who are a little to the more center area of the Democratic Party than him being worried about primary challengers. You'll recall that that's how he won. That's how several of his other DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, colleagues won. And a lot of the more centrist members of the state assembly and state senate don't want to have to deal with tough primaries. And so the effectiveness, and I think it says something about how he might be if he were mayor, is he's really good at marshaling coalitions from the outside and putting pressure on politicians to make change.
Dean, there's still a little more than a week before the election. What impact do you think early voting is having? Obviously, those people have made up their minds.
Yeah, you've already seen some 140,000 people vote in the first 4 days.
Is that a lot? It sounds like.
It's a lot compared to 2021, the last time there was a mayoral primary. That COVID still probably depressed the early voting turnout 4 years ago. I think a number of people decided to vote through absentee ballots that year. But the number of people who've come out to early vote is twice the number of who came out to vote 4 years ago.
And is there any indication, obviously there are no returns, but why do people come out early? Because they're more enthusiastic or more opposed, or is there any sort of trend that we can pinpoint?
I think it's a reflection of the very strong enthusiasm for certain candidates and get out the vote efforts. There was also the No Kings march on Saturday, I think also drove attention to the race and drove people to the polls that day as well.
Ben, was there a defining issue in this campaign other than I'm not Andrew Cuomo?
I would pick two. Trump. He is. Everyone is setting themselves up as a foil to him. The other, again, is this sort of larger soup of issues around affordability. All the candidates has had big housing proposals, big childcare proposals, how to make the city cheaper, how to keep people here. Whether that broke through is sort of anyone's question.
We'll see soon
Yeah.
enough. The negative campaigning, there's been a lot of it. Does that work?
I think for people who are unfamiliar with the candidates, it can have a great effect. If you don't know much about Zoran Mamdani and the only thing you see is a $5.4 million ad buy saying that he's radical and he wants to defund the police, he wants to put the homeless in the subway system, then yeah, I think if you have no background knowledge, that's going to have an effect.
Even though those things aren't true.
Those things are all very misleading.
Cuomo was running a rose garden strategy, not doing much public campaigning. Has that changed?
Not really. I think his events are very controlled, but he's doing more of them as the election's gotten closer. I think it's sort of, he's brought how you run a gubernatorial race, which is all across the state, to this, and it's also a reflection of his personality.
Dean, a tough question. There have been debates, there have been negative ads, there's been money, there have been endorsements. Is there one factor that sort of defines this campaign that is going to make someone the winner?
That is a good question, Sam. You know, one thing that surprised me, I'm going to sidestep this a little bit, is that public safety and crime initially had been thought to be just a real driver in this race, and Cuomo seized on that. He talked about the city in crisis, but you don't hear so much of that anymore. The candidates aren't talking about public safety nearly as much as they used to be.
That seems to be true.
And it comes at a moment when crime is down, too.
Yeah, according to the statistics. Dean Chang, Ben Areskes of the New York Times. That's it for this edition of Close Up. For the New York Times and CUNY TV, I'm Sam Roberts. And don't forget to download the CUNY TV app. You can catch our weekly program on the go anytime, anywhere.